must be Xerxes.
Imagine what horrible fate awaits my enemies when I would gladly kill any of my own men for victory. Well, this statement pretty much sums up the God King Xerxes from the 300 film series. Hello people, welcome back to our channel. In today's video, we will talk about Xerxes, the main villain of the Zack Snyder-directed movie 300 and its sequel, Rise of an Empire. Dripping in gold, Xerxes is depicted as a towering, ruthless, godlike ruler of the Persian Empire, who's obsessed with conquering the world, particularly Greece. Xerxes, who was once a moral prince, undergoes a dark transformation and is reborn as a larger-than-life megalomaniac. So what made Xerxes embrace this evil side? Is it mysticism and manipulation, or the grief of his father's death? What gives Xerxes his aura of divine arrogance? Let's find out together. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. Please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Set fire to the only thing of value in this country.
Who is Xerxes? Xerxes is a real character from the pages of history who became king of the Achaemenid Empire and led a second invasion against Greece in 480 BC to avenge his father's death. This god king is the central character of Frank Miller's 5-issue comic book series Xerxes, The Fall of the House of Darius and the Rise of Alexander that came out in 2018. But before that, Xerxes also featured as the primary antagonist in Frank Miller's 1998 comic series titled 300. This was adapted into a historic action movie by Zack Snyder in 2007, where Xerxes was the overarching villain. In the film's 2014 sequel, titled 300 Rise of an Empire, Xerxes' origin story was explored prominently. In both the films, the character of Xerxes is brilliantly portrayed by actor Rodrigo Santoro. So who is the much talked about Xerxes? Let's find out here. It all began with King Darius. Actually, it all began with Cyrus the Great, who established the Achaemenid dynasty all the way back in 550 BC. Darius was his successor, who ruled the Achaemenid Empire as the third king of kings between 522 and 486 BC until his death. Now, what's this Achaemenid Empire that we keep mentioning? It's the first Persian Empire, or Old Persia, based in modern-day Iran. Spread across as much as 5.5 million square kilometers, Achaemenid was the largest conquered empire at that point of time in history. It included most of Central and Northeast Asia, the majority of West Asia, Indus Valley of South Asia, and the Balkans and Egypt. Now back to Darius, the third king of kings, who wanted to expand the Achaemenid Empire further into European borders, and hence attacked Greece. But the movies depict that before the Persian forces could prepare themselves for a full-fledged battle against Greece, the Athenians attacked the fleet, and Darius was struck by a single arrow from Athenian general Themistocles. Xerxes was the son and successor of Darius, who saw the incoming arrow and attempted to save his father, but failed. Wounded and near death, Darius realized the might of the Greeks and decided to form a truce in his dying moments. But before he could mouth the words clearly to Xerxes, the Persian naval commander Artemisia pulled the arrow from Darius's chest and killed him. Darius couldn't convey his last words about a Persian-Greek truce to Xerxes, and thus began Artemisia's manipulative techniques, who brainwashed Xerxes into transforming himself into a self-proclaimed godlike king. When a grieving Xerxes wandered alone in the desert, searching for his new divine identity, Artemisia slaughtered all his well-meaning generals and took the reins of the Persian Empire in his own hands. In the desert, Xerxes stumbled upon a hermit's cave, and by using dark magic, he was stripped of his humanity and transformed into a god king. Unaware of his father's dying wish, Xerxes then decided to conquer the whole world. When Xerxes turned his attention towards Greece, his requests of accepting him as the god king were turned down by both Athens and Sparta. In retaliation, he waged war against Greece with an army of 300,000 warriors and marched towards Thermopylae. But the Spartan king Leonidas and his best few hundred soldiers were waiting for Xerxes' forces at the hot gates in Thermopylae, and through unique war tactics, the 300 brave Spartans killed hundreds and thousands of Xerxes' forces. This prompted Xerxes to approach Leonidas in person, offering him power and wealth in exchange for accepting defeat and agreeing to an allegiance, while Xerxes ruled over Greece. Leonidas humiliates Xerxes and provokes him to send a stronger army to deal with the 300 Spartans, but to no avail. When Xerxes' faith in his army sort of starts to falter, he's approached by the deformed Spartan Ephialtes, who turned out to be a traitor of Leonidas and revealed the presence of an alternate route around the hot gates at Thermopylae to Xerxes. King Leonidas learns of the treachery, but still decides to guard the hot gates with his remaining men to prevent Xerxes from entering Sparta. Then, Xerxes makes another attempt to subdue Leonidas, offering to spare his life in exchange for obedience. But Leonidas responds by throwing his spear at Xerxes and making the god king bleed. Threatened by Leonidas' undying spirit, Xerxes decides to finish the job from a distance and commands his troops to rain down arrows on the Spartans. Within a few minutes, Leonidas and his remaining Spartan warriors are killed, prompting Xerxes to rejoice his win, which however turns out to be short-lived, because later, Artemisia defeats Xerxes' orders and takes the navy through the Salamis Straits, only to be destroyed by the combined might of the Athenian and Spartan fleets. This practically marks Xerxes' defeat against Greece, who leaves Artemisia to her fate and retreats with his remaining army.
Kneeling will be hard for me.
There will be no glory in your sacrifice.
Xerxes' role in 300, the Battle of Thermopylae. We've touched upon the Battle of Thermopylae before, and in this segment, we'll detail Xerxes' role in the clash with the Spartans. In the 2007 movie 300, Xerxes is first mentioned in the initial scenes when a Persian messenger meets the Spartan braveheart King Leonidas, played by Gerard Butler. The messenger threatens Leonidas to accept Xerxes' offer of allegiance in exchange for sparing Sparta from complete annihilation, because Xerxes conquers and controls everything he rests his eyes on. He leads an army so massive it shakes the ground with its march, so vast it drinks the rivers dry. Leonidas, who is an extremely prideful king and one of the bravest warriors Sparta has ever seen, sees this request as humiliation and rejects Xerxes' offer by throwing his emissaries into a deep pit. This pretty much marks the beginning of Xerxes versus Leonidas. The Spartan king then decides to seek the advice of the greedy ephors, the prophets who served ancient Greek kings. After consulting the mystical oracle, the ephors decide against war, telling Leonidas to honor a sacred ritual by maintaining peace, or else Sparta will fall. However, it's soon revealed that Xerxes has poisoned the mind of Theron, a corrupt Spartan politician, and bribed the ephors with gold to stop Sparta from going to war. As per the advice of the ephors, the Spartan council rejects Leonidas' proposal of war when he decides to take his best 299 warriors and set out for Thermopylae. Leonidas misleads the council by saying he is going on a friendly stroll with 299 bodyguards. On their way, the 300 Spartans meet a ragtag team of Arcadians who promise to support them in the war against Xerxes. Upon reaching the hot gates in Thermopylae, the 300 are taken aback by the sheer number of fleets and troops in Xerxes' army. At first, they rejoiced to see that a deadly sea storm was destroying fleets and fleets of Persian ships, but they were also equally surprised the next morning to see a never-ending supply of Persian ships landing at the beach below. On their way to the hot gates, the Greeks also get a glimpse of how barbaric and whimsical Xerxes' army is when they walk through a burning village and see a tree formation with human corpses. They realize it's the work of Xerxes' most dreaded soldiers, the undead warriors called Immortals. Upon reaching the beach, the Spartans decide to anger Xerxes further by slaying his scouting armies and using them as mortar to rebuild the great Phoenician stone wall, which was first erected by their Greek ancestors. In addition, they also chopped up the arm of Xerxes' second emissary, who threatened that Xerxes would shower the Spartans with the wrath of 1,000 nations of the Persian Empire, and arrows that would blot out the sun. In his first wave of attack, Xerxes sends his best set of cavalry, but the Spartans tear through them with ease. What follows is a hail of arrows, as promised, but the Spartans survive the siege and force the Persian soldiers off the cliffs into the rocky seas below. Inspired by the 300's tactics and stubbornness, Xerxes makes his first appearance in the movie, arriving on the beach riding a chariot drawn by human slaves as wheels. Xerxes proclaims himself as a generous god and tries to bribe Leonidas by promising to make him warlord of Xerxes' army in exchange for kneeling at his feet. When Leonidas mocks him, Xerxes decides to send his best soldiers in the dark of the night, his personal guard, the best warriors in all of Asia, the supernatural immortals. These elite warriors are undefeatable, but they only manage to kill just a handful of Spartans before getting defeated, which leaves Xerxes shaking in rage. This is the very first time Xerxes feels a sense of fear when looking at Leonidas' army. Desperate, Xerxes begins to send his most vicious troops into battle, including sinister monsters, masked soldiers, superhuman trolls, tortured barbarians, and war beasts from all corners of the Persian Empire. When nothing else worked, Xerxes resorted to attacking the Spartans with wizardry and magic, and brought in elephant monsters from half the world away. Feeling helpless in the face of failure, Xerxes also resorted to slaughtering his own generals for incompetence. In the end, Xerxes opted for a dishonorable way of winning the war against Leonidas, by seeking help from the Spartan traitor Ephialtes. This deformed Spartan was abandoned as a child and wanted to play a significant role in the history of Sparta, but Leonidas had to deny him a position in the army because of his hunchback posture. In retaliation, he led the Persian forces through a secret passageway to launch a secret attack on Leonidas, whose team is reeling with the loss of Captain Artemis's son, Astynos. The next morning, Xerxes arrives at the battlefield and brings the immortals with him on the beach, while cavalries and archers flank the cliffs, ready to obliterate the Spartans once and for all. The egotistical Xerxes makes one last attempt to make Leonidas kneel before him, and Leonidas responded by throwing his spear at the false god king. The spear grazes Xerxes' face, making him bleed and showing him his human frailties, as per Leonidas' earlier promise to make a king bleed. But the remaining Spartans are woefully outnumbered, and Leonidas and his men fight to the last moment before getting killed in a hail of arrows. Before the final showdown in Thermopylae, Leonidas had sent one of his 299 men, General Delios, back to Sparta to share the tale of their bravery and to deliver a message to his queen Gorgo. The film 300 is actually a narration in flashback by Delios. The film ends with Delios leading 10,000 Spartan soldiers and 30,000 free Greeks against Xerxes' massive army at the Battle of Plataea, after the fall of the 300 in Thermopylae. Xerxes in 300, Rise of an Empire. The war expands. Xerxes' backstory is revealed in detail in the sequel film 2014's 300, The Rise of an Empire, directed by Naomuro. The movie begins with a glimpse of the slain 300 lying dead on the beach at Thermopylae, and then shifts to a narration by Leonidas' widow, Queen Gorgo. She states that Xerxes' wrath was fueled by Persian King Darius' death during the Battle of Marathon, when the Persians attempted to invade Greece for the first time. As we mentioned before, the Athenians decided to launch a shock attack on the Persian armies when they were still reeling from seasickness and were preparing for battle under King Darius' command. When this surprise battle was raging on in Marathon, a little-known Athenian general, Themistocles, reached the edge of the bay and locked eyes with King Darius on board his Persian ship on the sea. Just when Darius turned away, Themistocles shot a well-placed arrow that lodged into Darius' chest and incapacitated him. Xerxes witnessed the attack on his father, with rage dripping from his eyes. And this sight made Themistocles realize that it was Xerxes who should have been killed that day, not Darius. Brought back to his chamber, The dying King Darius mouthed his last wish to end the war with Greece, when his protege, the Persian navy commander Artemisia, who Darius favored more than his own son, pulled out the arrow from his chest and freed him of his pain. This marks the beginning of Xerxes' transformation from a grieving prince to a beastly god king. For 7 days, Xerxes mourned. On the 8th day, Artemisia came up with a twisted meaning behind Darius' dying words. She told Xerxes that Darius wished Xerxes to become a god when he said, "Only the gods can defeat the Greeks." She thus gathered the priests, wizards, and mystics who blessed Xerxes and wrapped him up in anointed bandages dipped in ancient potions and sent him on a mystical journey through the desert lands. After days of wandering in the harsh lands, Xerxes chanced upon a hermit's cave in a state of delirium and walked by the hollow eyes and the empty souls of its inhabitants. And deep inside, he stumbled upon a lake of otherworldly fluid consisting of pure evil and surrendered himself completely. When Xerxes emerged from the sinister lake, he was stripped of his human elements and transformed into an ominous demonic figure, clad in piercings and gold dripping from his body. Queen Gorgo describes Xerxes' transformation in these words: "His eyes blazed like scarlet coals. He was stripped, cleansed, glabrous, and smooth. He was reborn a god." Xerxes now stands at double the height of an average human, has a menacing voice, an enhanced physique, and a deadlier temper. Once the seeds of vengeance were sown in Xerxes and he was transformed into an evil conqueror, Artemisia ensured that Xerxes had no memory left of his past persona. So, in the dark of the night, she tortured and killed all of Xerxes' allies, who had raised him and offered him counsel all these years. Artemisia wanted Xerxes all to herself for furthering her own plans. She watched silently as Xerxes towered over the Persian army and declared, "For glory's sake, for vengeance sake, war." Xerxes then prepares to wage war against Greece, to avenge his father, and proceeds towards Thermopylae. We've told you that Artemisia played a huge role in Xerxes' transformation, and now we'll tell you why. As Xerxes was planning a rampage through Greece, one of Themistocles' closest allies, Silius, infiltrated Artemisia's fleets and learns that she is actually a Greek. As a child, she watched her parents get murdered by a group of Greek hoplites and was then locked up in a Greek ship's basement as a sex slave for years. Wounded and dying, she was abandoned in the streets when a Persian emissary took her under his wings. It's the same emissary who approached King Leonidas with Xerxes' message. For years, Artemisia trained rigorously with the best Persian warriors in the hopes of exacting revenge against Greece one day, and she got that chance by manipulating Xerxes into becoming a god king. Meanwhile, the storyline merges with the events of 300, but the Battle of Thermopylae with King Leonidas happens off-screen. Xerxes appears again in the movie when he rides up to Leonidas' corpse and in a fit of rage, chops off Leonidas' head with his golden axe. He brags that, "In all of Greece, there will be no savior to rise up and vanquish Xerxes' army, and that nothing can stop the march of his empire." As his army advances through the Hot Gates and burns up Sparta, Xerxes meets the Spartan traitor Ephialtes and sends a message to the Athenians, saying that Athens will suffer a similar fate as Sparta soon. Later, when Xerxes eventually begins to destroy Athens, he is seen holding Leonidas' severed head as a sign of his apparent victory against Greece. In the meantime, Themistocles and his army of several thousand men and just 50 ships barged into the Persian fleets in the Aegean Sea, which marked the beginning of the Battle of Artemisium. They trapped the Persian ships in a crevice by pretending to retreat and attacked the stuck Persian troops from the cliffs above. Themistocles' battle strategies left Artemisia impressed. Obsessed with the Athenian general, she attempted to seduce him towards the Persian side. When he refuses, the Persians light up the Athenian troops, and an explosion seemingly drowns Themistocles, who also got pierced by Artemisia's innumerable arrows. Believing Themistocles is dead, Artemisia calls for her troops to retreat, but the Athenian general survives and learns of King Leonidas' fall at Thermopylae. Themistocles confronts the traitor Ephialtes, and in exchange for sparing his life, sends a message to Xerxes, saying that combined Greek forces are converging at the Bay of Salamis for a final showdown against Persia. Learning about her failure to kill Themistocles, Artemisia gets paranoid about setting out with her naval fleet towards Salamis. But Xerxes commands her not to act impulsively and cross-check whether it's a trap or not. Xerxes' commanding attitude surprises Artemisia, who retaliates by saying she understands matters of war much better than the God King. When Xerxes says Artemisia shouldn't defy the God King, she reminds him it is she who put the crown on his childish head. She points out the follies in Xerxes' war strategies, such as killing Leonidas and his men only made them martyrs, and burning down Athens was equivalent to destroying the most valuable part of Greece. When Xerxes strikes her across the face, Artemisia threatens to take her entire naval fleet into battle and insults him with the words, "Sit on your golden throne and watch the battle from the safety I provide you." Artemisia and her fleet and Themistocles' naval army clash in the decisive Battle of Salamis, and the commanders soon find themselves fighting each other in a fierce clash of swords. Neither can defeat the other when Artemisia gets startled by the sound of waves. She turns to see Queen Gorgo has arrived at the bay with more Greek fleets to support Themistocles. Refusing to surrender to the Athenian general, Artemisia makes one last attempt to pick up the sword when she's slain by Themistocles. Xerxes, standing atop a cliff, witnesses the entire battle and realizes his naval fleets have been defeated. Shaking with rage and humiliation, he abandons the dying Artemisia to her fate and turns his back on the battle while retreating to his contingency on land. The movie ends with Themistocles and Queen Gorgo fiercely charging towards the Persians with the entire might of the Greek army. Xerxes' personality and god-complex behavior. The film 300 portrays Xerxes as an over-the-top, power-crazed megalomaniac who's determined to add more and more territories to the Persian Empire. His psychopathic persona is first fueled by an urge to avenge his father, and then turns into an obsession about conquering Greece. He is so egotistic that he attempted to make King Leonidas kneel in front of him, despite knowing that his fleets would kill Leonidas soon. Xerxes is also delusional to some extent as he begins to consider himself a true god. He gets visibly shocked to see his own blood dripping down his face when Leonidas cuts him with a spear, and finds it hard to believe that he, who is a god in his own eyes, can bleed. Xerxes is so full of ego that after failing to convince Leonidas into joining his team, Xerxes chopped off his head to assert dominance, even after the Spartan king was dead. In person, Xerxes is calm and collected most of the time, as he uses fear, intimidation, and promises of glory to subjugate his enemies. He's got a simple motto for his enemies: kneel and enjoy luxury, or resist and be destroyed. As part of his transformation, Xerxes clads himself in gold to appear distinctly different from his human subjects, which is a further assertion of his superiority and self-proclaimed godlike status. He even believes that he is loved, not feared by his Persian soldiers, and hence they carry out his whimsical commands without any resistance. Xerxes' god complex was his biggest flaw, which led him to think that the Greeks wouldn't be able to resist his divine aura, and would give in to his insulting requests. But beneath his god-clad persona lies a weak and insecure king who dove headfirst into violence instead of dealing with his grief and allowed himself to be manipulated. Xerxes was stubbornly arrogant and delusional, a deadly combination for a conqueror, which, however, also cost him loads of his army and fleets. But Xerxes was also ruthless and selfish, and regarded all his subjects as disposable. Xerxes was manipulative enough to convince the cunning Ephialtes into siding with the Persians by offering him riches, women, and social status, which the Greeks failed to give him. Xerxes was cruel and dismissive, making his human slaves carry his chariot and literally walking over them. Xerxes was also a feudal fighter, mostly hiding behind his humongous army to wage war. In the film franchise, he warned Artemisia not to enter the Salamis Straits, fearing the Persian army would be defeated there, and when his fleet was indeed destroyed, Xerxes retreated with his remaining troops, instead of carrying on his battle against the Athenian and Spartan forces. However, Xerxes wasn't always this cold and cunning. In 300, Rise of an Empire, we get to witness Xerxes' emotional side, when King Darius is shot by Themistocles during the first Persian invasion of Greece. He desperately mourns his father, and in his vulnerable state gets manipulated by Artemisia, which also shows how gullible he was and how unfit he was to become a king. Xerxes, The Fall of the House of Darius and the Rise of Alexander, graphic novel. Frank Miller further expanded the lore of Xerxes in his 2018 comic book series, Xerxes, The Fall of the House of Darius and the Rise of Alexander, which serves both as a sequel and prequel to the events of Miller's previous book series, 300. Interestingly, segments of the unreleased comics were adapted into the Rise of an Empire movie. As the name suggests, the 5-issue comic documents the rise of Xerxes as the ultimate Persian power and his rampage through Greece, till a fierce force from Macedonia strikes the Persian Empire and marks Alexander the Great's rise to power. Set in the fictional world of 300, the sprawling historical epic takes place between 499 BC to 330 BC. So let's dive right into it. The first chapter takes off in 490 BC, when King Darius invades mainland Greece. And as the Persian troops were setting up base, they were attacked by a small contingent led by Themistocles. Later, at the Battle of Marathon, the Athenians decided to abandon the traditional phalanx battle formation and tricked the Persians into a pincer-like arrangement. While the Persian troops faced their defeat in Marathon, Darius heads towards Athens by sea, which forces the Greek warriors at Marathon to return to Athens. In the second chapter, Darius dies a bit differently than we see in the films. Back in Athens, Themistocles realizes they are outnumbered by the Persian forces and comes up with an emergency plan. He asks every citizen, including women and the elderly, to be dressed in armor and stand on the shores, to give the idea of a mighty Athenian army. This trick works, and Darius hesitates to make landfall in Athens, but sends a small army of Androsians, who are destroyed by fiery arrows from the Greeks. Meanwhile, Athenian Admiral Aeschylus swims through the Persian ships and climbs up a cliff to attack Darius's ship with javelins, slaying several of his immortal guards. One such aim pierces through the Persian king, and he dies in the arms of his son Xerxes. Just like in the movie, his final words were not to continue the war with Greece, but fueled by vengeance, Xerxes vows to return to destroy Greece. Even though the Persian assaults come to an end, Themistocles remains haunted by a sense of unease, who believes that Xerxes should have been killed that day too. In the third chapter, Xerxes is determined to transform into a god king and travels to the desert of Najd in 479 BC. He summons the spirits of his ancestors, and through otherworldly rituals emerges as a terrifying god king. Once back to his capital, he takes Esther of Judea as his wife, when she promises to shower him with all her love in exchange for freeing her people. In the ambiguous end to the story, Xerxes frees the Jews either by burning Zion to ashes or by stopping the genocide started by his father. Meanwhile, after his disgraceful defeat in Greece, Xerxes returns to Persia but is soon assassinated in 465 BC, leaving his grand plans of expanding the empire further unfulfilled. After that, Alexander pretty much steals the show in the comics. Chapter 4 explores the reign of Darius III, the last Achaemenid king of kings, who turned the Persian force into a mightier empire between 336 to 330 BC. Enter Alexander the Great, who not only conquers all of Greece, but also invades Persia and subdues Darius's army in 333 BC, forcing Darius to flee Greece, leaving his children and wife behind. The final chapter takes place in 331 BC, when Darius wages war against Alexander and gets defeated again. This time, Darius flees to Babylon and is eventually assassinated, while Alexander formulates his own plans of conquering the world. The inspiration behind Xerxes' godlike persona in 300. As we told you before, Xerxes was a real historical figure, born to King Darius and Queen Atossa, and that he took over the Persian Empire after his father's death. History tells us that Xerxes continued his father's expansionist plans through brute military strength and diplomacy, but not through divine power. This historical figure was in no way superhuman or underwent a divine transformation. It's theorized that for the purpose of theatrics and impact, Frank Miller took some creative liberties while portraying his characters in his graphic novels, such as King Leonidas and his 300 Spartan warriors, who were uber-masculine and exceptionally great. In ancient times and the Middle Ages, it was believed that kings were divinely appointed, and they were the representative of gods amongst humans. Frank Miller decided to exaggerate this factor while portraying Xerxes as a contrast to the 300 exceptional men, and in doing so, Xerxes came out as a larger-than-life god king. The more Xerxes' despicable traits were enhanced, the more evil he became, and that was exactly what we needed to etch out the most loathsome villain. Zack Snyder takes the portrayal of Xerxes a notch higher in his film 300, a film that's sometimes criticized for glorifying Greek prejudices and beliefs. There was a tradition in Persian court to honor the king by kneeling or lying prostrate before the king. The Greeks were baffled by this practice, and some even considered this ritual to be derogatory to the king's subjects. Thus, it made sense that Zack Snyder decided that Xerxes' subjects would have to kneel in front of him. To establish his superiority, Xerxes was elevated to the level of a god king, not just in status, but also in stature. He was made a lot more exotic and barbaric by blending traditional elements of nobility, such as gold jewelry, and masculinity, such as his towering height and chiseled physique. Xerxes was peeled off his humanity, offering a stark contrast with the bleeding King Leonidas.
Thing of value in this country.
Xerxes in real history versus 300. What changed? Like we told you, Frank Miller's comics and the 300 movies spiced things up while portraying the historical figures, especially Xerxes. In real life, Xerxes may have been a whimsical prince, but also an excellent warrior who fiercely led the Persian troops against Greece. History tells us that Xerxes wasn't really a larger-than-life androgynous and flamboyant god king, but a symbol of Persian sophistication. He also did not hide behind his armies, especially behind the safety provided by Artemisia, but was an exemplary leader of the Persian forces. Unlike real history, the books and movies are filled with fantasy elements, and Xerxes' exaggerated portrayal is one of them. Considering his noble bloodline, Xerxes may have been 10 feet tall, but there's no record of Xerxes venturing into a hermit's cave and dipping into a golden lake to come out with a monstrous physique, an uber-deep voice, and too many piercings. Neither did Xerxes have mutants and monsters in his army, as shown in the movie. The Immortals indeed served as Xerxes' personal guards, but the Immortals were called so not because they were undead, but because these masked warriors were huge in numbers and could easily be replaced by another. No doubt the 300 movies are visually stunning, but history fanatics have criticized the makers for reducing Xerxes to a mere impulsive tyrant, as opposed to the real-life complex historical figure with excellent warfare strategies. Also, one must remember that both the 300 movies are actually retold versions. The first one was narrated by Leonidas' trusted soldier Delios, and the second one by Queen Gorgo. Both these figures grieved the death of King Leonidas and wanted to light the fire of resistance in the Greeks. Hence, the fantastical elements of the story and the inflated description of Xerxes could very well be for a dramatic flair, both for the audience in the movie and outside. That also explains why both the films and the comics incorporated some historical inaccuracies, such as Artemisia wasn't as influential a figure in Xerxes' life as was shown, and that neither King Darius or Xerxes were present at the Battle of Marathon, and that Xerxes did not really send an emissary to Leonidas, but his dad Darius did.
Glabrous and smooth.
Marvelous verdict. This Persian god king is undoubtedly the perfect antagonist against the Greek bravehearts Leonidas and Themistocles, and his complicated transformation story makes this character all the more fantastical and terrifying. So folks, that's all about Xerxes we have for you now. Which other character from the 300 franchise would you want us to explore next? Please tell us in the comments below. Thanks for watching, people. If you liked our video, stay tuned for more fantasy content. See you super soon. And if you liked our content, Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.